Scroll through Instagram or TikTok and you'll see them. Thousands of posts with hashtags like hashtag deconstruction, hashtag exvangelical, and hashtag churchyouhurt. Videos of people sharing their stories, tears streaming, voices breaking, as they explain why they're walking away from the faith they once held dear. As of February 2022, there were nearly 300,000 posts on Instagram using the hashtag deconstruction. That number has only grown since. On Reddit, communities dedicated to faith deconstruction have tens of thousands of members sharing their journeys, their doubts, their pain. This isn't a small fringe movement. This is millions of people publicly dismantling their beliefs, questioning everything they were taught, and often leaving Christianity altogether. According to Barna Research, 42% of American adults report that they've deconstructed the faith of their youth. 42%. That's not a handful of rebels or a few disappointed church members. That's nearly half of all American adults who've gone through some process of fundamentally re-examining what they believe. And here's what's striking. About 40 million American adults who used to attend church no longer do. For the first time in 80 years, the number of adults who don't attend church outnumbers those who do. So what's happening? Why are millions of people, many of them passionate believers who served in churches, led worship, taught Sunday school, went on mission trips, walking away from the faith they once considered the foundation of their lives? Today, we're diving deep into the deconstruction movement. We'll explore what it actually means, who's leaving and why, what happens after deconstruction, and what this massive exodus reveals about the state of Christianity in America. Whether you're deconstructing yourself, watching someone you love go through it, or trying to understand why this is happening, this conversation matters. Because deconstruction is reshaping American Christianity in real time. So let's begin. Let's talk honestly about deconstructing Christianity. First, let's define what we're actually talking about, because the word deconstruction means different things to different people. Elisa Childers, a Christian apologist, defines deconstruction as the process of systematically dissecting and often rejecting the beliefs you grew up with. Tyler Huckabee, writing for Relevant magazine, describes it more gently as a process of re-examining the faith you grew up with. The term comes from French philosopher Jacques Derrida's philosophical concept of deconstruction, though the religious version has only a loose connection to that academic theory. In practice, deconstruction is when believers start questioning their faith, not just asking normal questions that strengthen belief, but fundamentally doubting core doctrines, practices, and institutions. They take apart their faith piece by piece, examining each belief to decide whether they'll keep it or discard it. Alan Jameson, in his book A Churchless Faith, describes it like this: people engaged in the deconstruction of their faith remove each article of their belief and value system and submit it to ongoing reflection and scrutiny. Each component is critiqued on the basis of whether the individual will appropriate it as part of their own personal belief system. It's important to understand that not everyone who deconstructs leaves Christianity. In fact, research shows that about 1/3 of Christians, including both practicing and non-practicing Christians, report having deconstructed their faith at some point. Many remain Christian, just with different beliefs or practices than before. David Kinnaman, CEO of Barna, explains, "Not all who deconstruct are ex-Christians. Many people who say they have deconstructed are still Christian and still in the pews." So deconstruction can lead to several different outcomes. Some people reconstruct. They rebuild their faith into something that feels more authentic to them, often landing in progressive Christianity or different denominations. Some people de-identify. They stop calling themselves Christian but might maintain some spiritual practices. And some deconvert entirely, leaving Christianity for atheism, agnosticism, or other belief systems. The word has become so popular and so broad that it's almost lost precise meaning. But at its core, deconstruction is about taking apart what you've believed and deciding for yourself what, if anything, to keep. Now let's look at the numbers, because the scale of this phenomenon is staggering. 42% of American adults say they've deconstructed the faith of their youth. That includes people who were raised Christian and those raised in other traditions, or with no religion at all. But focusing specifically on Christians, 36% of practicing Christians and 37% of non-practicing Christians report having deconstructed their faith at some point. Over the past 50 years, Christians have declined from 90% of the U.S. population to 62%. That's a massive shift, and much of that decline has accelerated in recent years. Between 2010 and 2020, the number of Americans identifying as religious nones, people with no religious affiliation, jumped from 16% to 29%. They're now the largest single religious category in America, outnumbering Catholics and evangelicals individually. About 40 million American adults used to attend church but no longer do. 40 million. That's more than the entire population of California. Church closures tell the story too. In recent years, between 4,000 and 6,000 churches close annually while only about half that number open. Some experts predict that 15,000 churches will close in 2025 alone. And it's not just about attendance. It's about engagement with Scripture. In 2011, over half of Americans were Bible users who looked at their Bible at least several times a year. By 2024, that number had dropped to 38%. 151 million Americans are now considered Bible disengaged, an all-time high. So we're not talking about a small trend. We're talking about a seismic shift in American religious life happening right before our eyes. So why is this happening? What's driving millions of people to deconstruct their faith? Let's explore the major reasons. The first and most commonly cited reason is intellectual doubt. People stop believing the core claims of Christianity are true. They start asking questions. How do we know the Bible is reliable? Why are there contradictions in Scripture? How can a loving God allow such horrific suffering? Why does Christianity claim to be the only true religion when billions of people believe something different? When they seek answers, they find the explanations they were given growing up no longer satisfy. Christian apologetic, the intellectual defense of the faith, feels weak, circular, or based on assumptions they can no longer accept. One person who deconstructed explained, "I realized I was doing mental gymnastics to make Christianity make sense. Once I stopped contorting my thinking to force it to work, the whole thing fell apart." This is especially common among people raised in traditions that emphasized biblical inerrancy, the belief that the Bible contains no errors. When they discover contradictions, historical inaccuracies, or scientific impossibilities in Scripture, their entire faith can unravel. If one part is wrong, how can you trust any of it? The second major reason is moral disagreement, particularly regarding LGBTQ+ issues. Research shows that disagreement with the Church's stance on sexuality and gender is the #1 trigger for young people beginning to doubt their faith. They have LGBTQ+ friends, family members, or classmates. They see these people as normal, healthy, and deserving of love and acceptance. But their churches teach that homosexuality is sinful, that same-sex relationships are wrong, that transgender people are confused or rebellious. The cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable. One person who deconstructed wrote, "I couldn't worship a God who would create someone gay and then condemn them for it. That's not love. That's cruelty." Many LGBTQ+ people raised in Christian homes describe their deconstruction as a matter of survival. Staying in Christianity meant accepting that they were fundamentally broken, sinful, and rejected by God. Leaving Christianity meant choosing self-acceptance and mental health. But it's not just LGBTQ+ people themselves who deconstruct over this. Straight, cisgender Christians, particularly younger ones, increasingly see their church's treatment of LGBTQ+ people as morally wrong. And if the church is wrong about something this fundamental, what else are they wrong about? The third reason is institutional failure and loss of trust. People are losing faith in large institutions across society: government, media, business, and church. We live in an age of mass information, fake news, political theater, income inequality, and public health crises. Institutions that were once trusted are now viewed as corrupt, ineffective, and self-serving. Churches are no exception. In fact, they might be hit harder than other institutions because they claim moral authority while often failing to live up to their own standards. The sexual abuse scandals have devastated trust. The Catholic Church's decades-long cover-up of priest abuse. The Southern Baptist Convention's mishandling of abuse reports. Megachurch pastors like Bill Hybels, Carl Lentz, Mark Driscoll, and most recently Robert Morris, all falling from grace amid moral failures. According to one statistic, 1 out of 10 Protestants under 35 has left a church because they felt accusations of sexual misconduct weren't taken seriously enough. Financial scandals and corruption fuel the distrust. Prosperity gospel preachers living in mansions and flying private jets while asking for donations. Megachurch pastors with undisclosed salaries and minimal financial transparency. Churches spending millions on buildings while ignoring the poor. And then there's the hypocrisy. Churches preaching love while demonstrating judgment. Leaders teaching sexual purity while engaging in affairs. Congregations claiming to follow Jesus while supporting political policies that harm the vulnerable. One person explained their deconstruction this way: I watched my church preach compassion on Sunday and then vote to cut programs for the poor. I watched them talk about family values while supporting politicians who bragged about sexual assault. The hypocrisy became impossible to ignore. The fourth reason is trauma and church hurt. This is deeply personal and painful. Many people deconstruct because they've been genuinely harmed by churches. Spiritual abuse by authoritarian pastors who controlled every aspect of members' lives. Emotional manipulation through fear of hell. Rejection and exclusion for asking questions or expressing doubts. Women counseled to stay in abusive marriages. LGBTQ+ teenagers sent to conversion therapy. People told their depression or anxiety was a sin issue that prayer alone could fix. Purity culture has left particularly deep scars. An entire generation, especially women, taught that their virginity was their greatest gift, that any sexual thought or feeling was sinful, that they were damaged goods if they had sex before marriage. The result has been shame, sexual dysfunction, and years of therapy to heal. People of color have been hurt by predominantly white churches that ignored or minimized racism, that remained silent during Black Lives Matter protests, that made them feel like they had to choose between their racial identity and their faith. For many, deconstruction isn't about losing faith. It's about escaping harm. It's about survival. The fifth reason is the politicization of Christianity, particularly the merger of evangelicalism with conservative Republican politics and the Trump movement. Young people especially describe watching their churches become more focused on political activism than spiritual formation. They saw Christianity become virtually indistinguishable from right-wing politics. When Donald Trump became president and received overwhelming evangelical support despite behavior that contradicted everything they'd been taught Christianity valued, many experienced a crisis of faith. How could Christians who preached about character, integrity, and morality so enthusiastically support a leader whose behavior seemed to embody the opposite? The disconnect was devastating. One person wrote, "The word Trump was mentioned 81 times in survey responses as a key reason for leaving Christianity. That's how significant his presidency was in driving people away." This political alignment has made Christianity feel like a tribal identity marker rather than a universal spiritual truth. If you don't share those politics, you don't belong. And increasingly, young people don't share those politics. The sixth reason is simply cultural and intellectual evolution. People are exposed to more diverse ideas, worldviews, and experiences than ever before. They travel, they attend college, they interact with people from different backgrounds. They realize that good, moral, thoughtful people exist in every religion and no religion. They see that non-Christians aren't all lost, unhappy, or immoral. In fact, many seem more joyful and authentic than the Christians they know. They study comparative religion and realize that many religions make similar truth claims with similar levels of conviction. Why is Christianity right and all the others wrong? They learn about the history of Christianity, the Crusades, the Inquisition, colonialism, slavery justified by Scripture, and struggle to reconcile that with the idea of Christianity as a uniquely moral force. The information age has made it impossible to maintain the insulated worldview that many grew up with. Once you see outside the bubble, it's hard to go back in. So what happens after people deconstruct? Where do they go? The outcomes are surprisingly diverse. Some people reconstruct. They rebuild their faith into something that feels more authentic and sustainable. Often this means moving toward progressive Christianity, affirming LGBTQ+ relationships, emphasizing social justice, reading the Bible less literally, focusing on Jesus' teachings about love and compassion rather than doctrinal purity. They might leave evangelical churches for mainline Protestant denominations, or join non-denominational progressive congregations, or explore contemplative Christianity with its emphasis on mysticism and spiritual practice. These folks often say things like, "I'm still a Christian, just not that kind of Christian anymore. I found a faith that actually resonates with how I understand God and the world." Others become spiritual but not religious. They maintain belief in God or some higher power, they pray or meditate, they find meaning and transcendence in nature, relationships, or art, but they don't participate in organized religion. They've kept the spirituality while rejecting the institution, and for many, this feels liberating rather than tragic. Still, others deconvert entirely. They become atheists or agnostics. They conclude that there's no good evidence for God's existence, that religion is a human construct, that meaning and morality can be found without supernatural beliefs. Prominent examples include Rhett McLaughlin and Link Neal from the comedy duo Rhett and Link, who've shared their deconstruction journey on their podcast. Joshua Harris, author of I Kissed Dating Goodbye, who not only left Christianity but apologized for the harm his book caused. Marty Sampson, former Hillsong worship leader. Abraham Piper, son of famous pastor John Piper. These high-profile deconversions receive attention because these were people with thriving ministries, significant influence, and apparent deep faith. Their departures shock and sadden believers who benefited from their work. And many people describe feeling profound relief, peace, and freedom after leaving Christianity. They say things like, "I don't feel guilty all the time anymore. I don't fear hell. I can just be myself. I've never been happier." This is hard for committed Christians to hear, but it's a consistent pattern. For many people, leaving Christianity improves their mental health and overall well-being. But deconstruction isn't always smooth or simple. Many people describe it as deeply painful. Losing community, disappointing family, experiencing existential anxiety about meaning and purpose, grieving the loss of something that once gave their life structure. For every person who finds freedom in leaving, there's someone who feels lost, lonely, and uncertain about what comes next. Now, how should we understand all of this? Is deconstruction good or bad? Is it a crisis or a correction? The answer depends entirely on your perspective. From a conservative evangelical viewpoint, deconstruction is a tragedy. It's people abandoning truth for cultural trends. It's rebellion against God dressed up in intellectual language. It's the enemy winning souls. Some leaders have been very critical. John Cooper of the band Skillet said, "It is time that we declare war against this deconstruction Christian movement. There is nothing Christian about it. It is a false religion." Matt Chandler, after initially equating deconstruction with leaving the faith, clarified that genuine doubt and theological wrestling are different from deconstruction. But the implication was clear: deconstruction as typically practiced leads people away from truth. From this perspective, the solution is better apologetic, stronger discipleship, clearer teaching, and helping people understand why their doubts are misguided. But from a progressive or post-evangelical perspective, deconstruction can be healthy, even necessary. It's people courageously examining beliefs they inherited rather than chose. It's intellectual honesty. It's escaping toxic theology and harmful institutions. Tyler Huckabee argues that deconstruction can result in deconversion, but most often, it's somewhere in between, rethinking the things you've always believed and coming to a new, different understanding. He even suggests that Martin Luther's Reformation fits into the paradigm of what researchers would call deconstruction today. David Kinnaman from Barna says, "Deconstruction can be an important period for addressing backstories and preparing people for potential disillusionment in their discipleship. We need to tell the truest story about what it means to be part of a Christian community, so that when people encounter disappointment or larger questions, they remain grounded. From this perspective, deconstruction is an opportunity for growth, maturity, and authentic faith. The solution isn't tighter control or better arguments, but honesty, humility, and willingness to change. So who's right? Maybe both, maybe neither. Here's what I think. Deconstruction reveals something broken in how Christianity has been practiced in America, particularly in evangelical circles. When millions of people raised in the church, taught to love Jesus, immersed in Christian community walk away, not because they're rebelling or angry, but because they honestly can't believe anymore or can't participate in institutions that harm people, that's not just individual failure. That's systemic failure. The fact that intellectual doubts are so common suggests churches haven't created space for honest questions. The fact that moral disagreements drive people away suggests churches haven't engaged contemporary ethical issues thoughtfully. The fact that trauma and abuse are so prevalent suggests churches haven't protected the vulnerable or held leaders accountable. At the same time, not every deconstruction represents healthy growth. Some people do abandon genuine truth for cultural trends. Some people use intellectual objections to avoid moral demands. Some people leave because faith requires something they don't want to give. The challenge is discerning which is which, and that requires humility on all sides. Here's what concerns me most: the polarization. Conservative Christians dismissing all deconstruction as rebellion. Progressive Christians celebrating all deconstruction as enlightenment. Neither extreme is helpful. We need space for genuine questions without assuming those questions will lead to apostasy. We need accountability for institutions without throwing out the faith entirely. We need intellectual honesty without intellectual arrogance. We need moral evolution without moral relativism. For those deconstructing, I understand. Many of you have been genuinely harmed. Many of you are asking honest questions that deserve honest answers. Many of you can't in good conscience remain in churches that contradict your deepest values. But I'd encourage you to separate Jesus from his followers, to distinguish core claims from cultural accretions, to consider whether you're rejecting Christianity itself or just a particular expression of it. For those watching others deconstruct, listen. Really listen. Don't dismiss their doubts as rebellion or their pain as exaggeration. Don't defend indefensible behavior by church leaders. Don't pretend everything is fine when clearly it's not. If people you love are leaving, the worst thing you can do is tell them they were never really saved, that they're going to hell, that they're deceived. That just confirms their decision. For church leaders, this is a crisis that demands response. You can't just preach harder and hope it goes away. You have to address the actual reasons people are leaving: institutional failure, moral disagreement, intellectual inadequacy, trauma. That means creating space for questions, holding leaders accountable, taking abuse seriously, engaging LGBTQ+ issues thoughtfully, separating the gospel from partisan politics, teaching theology that can withstand scrutiny. The future of American Christianity depends on whether churches can adapt without compromising, can hold truth and grace in tension, can acknowledge failures while maintaining hope. Deconstruction is reshaping Christianity in real time. Millions are leaving. Millions more are questioning. The landscape is changing faster than at any point in American history. Where this leads, no one knows. Maybe to the death of American Christianity as we've known it. Maybe to renewal and reformation. Maybe to radical polarization between fundamentalism and progressivism with nothing in between. But one thing is certain: the old model is dying. Christianity that relies on cultural pressure, family tradition, intellectual isolation, or institutional authority is collapsing. What emerges from the rubble remains to be seen. If this video resonated with you, share it. If you're deconstructing or have deconstructed, know you're not alone. Millions are walking this path. If you're trying to understand why people are leaving, I hope this helped. Leave a comment with your story or your thoughts. Let's keep this conversation going with honesty, respect, and compassion. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.